Hello and welcome everybody, I'm the Rambling Director, and today we have another top 10, top 13 kind of list for you today. I enjoyed making the last two so much I've decided to do more of them because it's not only kind of easy to make, it's really fun to go through all of my old favorite movies and different topics and pick out the ones that I think are the absolute best. But before we get into my list, I'm going to go ahead and do my honorable mentions because I've got quite a few of them. So these are the movies that did not make it on the list primarily because I wanted it to actually be the number 13 this time. But they are totally on the list as movies you need to check out if you've never seen. And if you watched them before, heck, go watch them again because they're great. Blithe Spirit, starring Rex Harrison. This is a really good one. It's not really a horror film, but it's a ghost story, and a really fun one. Sleepy Hollow by Tim Burton. Technically not really a ghost story, that's why it's not on the list. He's really a reanimated corpse, not a ghost, but there's a lot of ghostly qualities about the story and about him. It feels like an old ghost story that you tell around the fire. But it's not technically a ghost, so it couldn't be on the list, but I highly recommend it. One of my favorite films. House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price, the original. The remake is good too, but this is like one of those movies that leaves you wondering if there were any ghosts there to begin with. It's a campy movie, but William Castle's movies were all campy and they enjoyed being campy. He's in on the joke, so if you go in and enjoy yourself and kind of accept that it's going to be a little goofy, you'll have a lot of fun. Silent Hill. I would recommend all of the almost all of the Silent Hill video games. But I don't know if this is a popular or unpopular opinion. I really like the movie Silent Hill. I think it's just great. Amityville, of course it's a classic. It's not one of my favorites. In fact, I don't really care much for it. But I can understand why a lot of people do, and it is really kind of required viewing if you are a horror fan. The original 1960 13 Ghosts. Again, very campy. It's not meant to be a serious movie from beginning to end, but it actually does have some creepy moments. In fact, it's one of the only movies where the opening credits actually kind of freaked me out the first time I watched it, and I had to step away for a minute and be like, bro, it's just screaming, creepy music, and drawings. Why is this freaking me out? When you get into it, there's nothing else like that, but that opening is actually really unsettling. Exorcist 3 with George C. Scott. George C. Scott's going to pop up again on this list. He's one of my very favorite actors. Technically, though, Exorcist 3 is about a demon. It's not a ghost story, it's a demonic possession story. And I kind of pushed that later on this list, but The Exorcist is too blatant about it. That being said, The Exorcist 3, I think, is infinitely better than the first Exorcist. Rebecca from 1940 by Alfred Hitchcock. If you've seen this movie, you might think, hold on there, Ben. Nothing supernatural happens in that movie. And I agree, but Rebecca herself haunts the entire film. In fact, it's something of a naturalistic ghost film, because her memory so thoroughly haunts Maxim and the new Miss De Winter that you really feel her presence, even though, as a physical ghost, she never makes an appearance. You never even see her face. And yet her impact is so felt that the only way you could title the movie is Rebecca. Yeah, I know the book is called Rebecca too, but let me have my impactful statement to end this section, please. The Uninvited, both the original and the remake with Emily Browning. Very underrated today, I feel like. Ghost with Patrick Swayze's dog. Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg. It's not a horror film, it doesn't really even have any horror elements in it that I can remember, but it is a ghost story and a dang good one, and a heartbreaking romance. I really like that film, so I had to throw it in here, at least as an honorable mention. I know that was a lot of honorable mentions, but what can I say? I like to give you people a good bang for your buck, and 13 films on this list just quite frankly wasn't enough, but it makes for a very Halloween-y video title, so I just kind of went with it. So there's your extras. Now, let's get into the real meat of the list. And finally in this section, Crimson Peak. Anything Guillermo del Toro touches is gold as far as I'm concerned. Crimson Peak, I feel like is very underrated. I've never heard many people praise it, and yet it really is like one of the best haunted house ghost story sort of films to come out in recent years. So I just cannot recommend it enough. Number 12, The Sixth Sense. Not technically a horror movie, I know, but it is entirely about ghosts. And, well, I almost spoiled something. I won't. I know it's an older movie now, but it does have a real great twist involving the ghosts. And to me, I've always felt it really had some genuinely good moments of fear revolving around Haley Joel Osment's character seeing the ghosts in these very unexpected ways. Sometimes it's like the woman in the kitchen who is not like a jump scare, but she is horrifying, and she really does just leave such an impact. Or the little girl who is actually a jump scare, but also has kind of that twist that after the immediate scare, there's actually nothing to be scared of. She's not a threat. Number 11, The Changeling with George C. Scott. This is another one of those films that is just built on atmosphere. It's also a lesser known sort of film, and so it is one of my highest recommendations to you of this list, because I feel like most people probably haven't seen it unless you're just a die-hard ghost story fanatic, horror fanatic, or a major George C. Scott fan. And if you're not a major George C. Scott fan, then what's wrong with you? The setup for the story is about as basic as you get. A man moves into a mansion and he soon realizes that it might be haunted. And in that sense, it is very basic in terms of story, but then when you actually start getting into it, they do all sorts of fantastic little twists and turns with it that keep you on the edge of your seat the whole time. And I think it is a genuinely scary movie and a truly great ghost story. Number 10, 13 Ghosts, the remake. I know, odd to put both movies on this list in different categories, but I think the remake is better than the original. I love Matthew Lillard. I have a man crush on Matthew Lillard. I always have. He's just one of my favorites. He's awesome. Tony Shalhoub from Monk is also in this. In fact, he's actually the star of the film. And they kind of restructure the original film. So it is still about the haunted house, a guy collecting ghosts and keeping them in his home to kind of study, but they add so much to it. And by the way, the cinematography for this film deserved an Oscar. Every wall of the inside of this house is made of glass, but you never see a reflection. Ever. It looks like a Kubrick movie sometimes. The ghosts are all these incredibly unique designs with these intricate backstories. True, I would have liked to have seen more of the ghosts and heard more of those backstories, but if you've watched the original, you know that all of the ghosts are very interesting. Like, there's just a pair of arms smashing something with a hammer, and you never get that backstory. In this movie, they actually did write the backstory, and you know why the ghosts are doing what they're doing and why they behave the way they do. You just kind of have to watch the special features to find out that good stuff, and it would have been nice if it was in the movie. But besides that shortcoming, it is a great ghost story. It's almost a slasher ghost story, which you don't see a lot. The ghosts actually do a fair bit of damage. There's one kill, it was a formative memory for me, I feel like, because the first time I saw it, it freaked me the heck out. But it's stuck with me my whole life as one of the coolest horror movie deaths. There's like a vertical door, and it slices vertically through a man, and the front of his body, like the first half of his body, slides down, and you can see like his innards. It's like a cutaway of his body. It's so gross, but so creative. And again, the ghosts are so creative. I could do a whole video about 13 Ghosts. In fact, maybe I will. Number 9, The Conjuring. It's kind of odd to have such a modern movie on any of my lists this high up, but I've always stood by that The Conjuring is one of the best ghost story movies, ghost story horror movies that has come out in the last 15 years. If there's one thing I do criticize about it, I've made a whole video, which got copyright flagged, so it's not on my channel anymore, but I did make a whole video about how you can make really good jump scares and how jump scares don't deserve the bad reputation they get, because when done right, they are exceptional. This movie has some great jump scares, but it does start over-relying on them towards the end of the film. which to me does dampen the effect, because when it's happening every 2 minutes, it's not, you don't get a proper build up to it, and you start to predict it a little bit. But take that out, and I think it's a really great ghost story. Number 8, The Innocents from 1961, directed by Jack Clayton and starring Deborah Kerr. I think this is one of those rare examples of a movie that feels like it should have been in another director's filmography. It feels like Robert Weiss's The Haunting, and when I first saw it, I thought Robert Weiss must have directed it, because it feels like it takes place in the same universe. This is an adaptation of the Henry James story, The Turning of the Screw, which was recently adapted again in a series that I think was called The Turning. This is the story of a new nanny who takes care of these 2 children, and she slowly starts to suspect that they were, let's say, abused. Not physically per se, but that they were witness to a lot of things that they shouldn't have been, and that maybe their relationship with one specific person was more than it also should have been. It's a psychological thriller, but more than that, it is clearly a ghost story. It's one of those few things, and this is again why it feels so much like The Haunting, it's one of those few psychological thriller ghost stories. It's odd that there's not more that are true psychological thrillers built around ghosts, because it is a psychologically intense idea to think that this entity is just there around you, hurting you, and you have no idea where it even is. The ending is one of the most thrilling, nail-biting things you will ever see on film, and when you consider that it was 1961, the ending to be as dark and hopeless as it is unreal. And this is another film where the opening credits freak me the heck out. Number 7, The Legend of Hell House from 1973. This one stars Pamela Franklin, who is another one of those people I've always had a bit of a crush on since I was a child. And she's awesome in this movie. Everybody's awesome in this film. Roddy McDowall's also in this movie. So they basically play paranormal investigators that go to this house that was formerly the home of a serial killer. And other paranormal investigators have gone there before them, and they were all killed in mysterious circumstances. It's a great setup, and honestly, it's just an exercise in great pacing. I love the way this movie is paced. I love, again, the vibrancy of it. It's almost got that same Suspiria sort of vibe, where it feels brighter and lighter than it actually the subject matter is. Side note, it has one heck of a movie poster. "1408", based on a Stephen King story and starring John Cusack. This is actually one of those movies that is it might be one of the best movies I've ever seen, actually. It's funny how so many great Stephen King stories kind of take place in one room. John Cusack plays a skeptic who stays in this haunted hotel room, and the whole thing is how he's becoming kind of psychologically unhinged because of the room. And I don't want to get too into it because it would start to spoil things almost immediately, but I just love how this character played by Samuel L. Jackson is trying to keep him from being in the room, and it kind of sets up almost kind of a nice red herring as to whether or not any of this is going to be real, and very quickly you realize, at the very least, it's real in John Cusack's head, which is a really, again, that psychological aspect to ghost movies that I just love. And this really is a movie that, even if you don't like ghost stories, I really highly recommend you check it out, just because it is a great movie in its own right. The Ring. You can throw Ringu in there if you want, but the American film is what I saw and what gave me nightmares as a kid, okay? So the movie is about a cursed VHS tape. Yeah, I grew up in that time period. Where if you watch it, after 7 days, you will die. Unless you copy the VHS tape and give it to somebody else and they see it. Then the curse is lifted from you, but it's only because you've passed death on to somebody else. Really scary. You can see how other horror films like It Follows was inspired by that concept. And a lot of horror has been inspired by Ring and Ringu over the years. There's one scene that's bothered me my whole life. It's really stuck with me, and it honestly is more troubling now that I'm a parent. It's when she comes in and sees the kid watching the VHS tape, and this visceral like, oh no, we don't watch that, you know. Oh man, that is horrifying. The idea of like, it's always like been an element of horror for me that's really been scary, is the doing of things that cannot be undone. Like, for instance, horror itself. Once you've seen a horrific image, you cannot unsee it. And sometimes the longer you go without seeing it, the worse it becomes in your memory, even though it wasn't that bad. So it's kind of a psychological aspect of horror in general, but this movie does a really good job. I know I'm pushing this a little to include it in the ghost story, but Samara is technically a ghost, so I think it counts. Number 4, The Poltergeist. I only watched this movie for the first time this year. Don't hate me, don't hate me. I know. What was I doing? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know how this movie slipped by me for so long. Because I'd heard about it, I've seen people quote it, I've seen people parody it, but my wife wanted to watch it, and I suddenly realized, holy cow, I've never actually watched The Poltergeist. And after only one viewing, it's number 4 on the list. That tells you how good I think it is. The Poltergeist is like, man, it is one heck of a ghost story. And technically they play a little fast and loose with what a poltergeist is. And at the end you find out it's not really one poltergeist, it's like a bunch of ghosts acting in tandem. But get over that and you see it is actually a ghost story. What I love about this movie, why it's so high up on the list, despite the fact that I just saw it, is its sense of humor. It works all the better because when the daughter is taken by the spirits, you feel it all the more because you've had kind of this nostalgic, cheesy, goofy fun with the family. And so when it drops into genuine tragedy, you actually do feel like you've had good times with this family. Where did the good times go? You know, it works on a number of levels. Both mine and my wife's favorite character is Tangina, who is played by Zelda Rubinstein, which besides having one of the greatest names of all time, she is probably the best part of the movie. She is like a psychic who comes in to cleanse the house. She is amazing. And she's a little person who has this incredibly distinct voice. Apparently, she made her film debut playing one of the Munchkins in Wizard of Oz. Craig T. Nelson is also phenomenal. He gives one of the best performances as a father whose child has gone missing that I've ever seen. Carnival of Souls from 1962. This is one of those few movies that I watched by myself. And it was so unnerving to me that I had to wait to watch the ending until my wife got home, which was a bad move in hindsight because actually the ending is the least creepy part of it, which I find is the case with a lot of ghost stories. But the build-up and the suspense around it is incredible. Basically, at the very beginning, a woman gets into a car wreck and she's assumed dead, but then, lo and behold, she just walks out of the lake one day and she's fine, and even continues her job as an organist. But then she relocates to a new city, and she is constantly attracted to this old abandoned carnival. For what reason, she can't really say. She really just cannot assimilate very well with the people around her. She's just kind of an outsider, like she really doesn't belong in that world. Hint, hint. I think you can see where this is going. And she keeps kind of getting a little bit closer into the carnival, and the carnival itself is haunted by these really creepy dudes that are around and really want her. And there's a part that's incredibly creepy where she starts playing this music and it becomes more and more disjointed, and then the priest comes in and is like, "Hey, stop playing that demonic music, you're fired, get out of here, I don't want you playing that stuff in my church." And it gives you like this really creepy, uneasy vibe where like you don't necessarily understand everything about the scene and why that was happening, but it just gives you an uneasy feeling. And the whole movie is like that. The majority of this film Very quiet. It could actually function as a silent movie. There's not a whole lot of dialogue in it. It's mainly built around atmosphere and just the tension of this strange attraction she has to the carnival. Oh, I really struggled what order to put these two in because I love both of them so much. But I did have to choose, so here it goes. The Shining. I know I've said before it's one of my favorite movies. I'm actually planning a video about The Shining to come out relatively close to Halloween. I just love this movie. I think it is a masterclass in filmmaking. Stanley Kubrick is my favorite director of all time. The script is perfect. The editing is perfect. The music is perfect. It's one of those few films, I don't say it a lot, but it's one of those very few films I would say is a perfect movie. There's nothing wrong with it. And I just think it's absolutely deserving of all the praise it gets. Some people go a little too far with praising it and go off into crazy world, but besides that, you do have a lot of legitimate praise for the movie, and the film absolutely deserves it. Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance, unworldly. It's just incredible what he does. The performance that does not get nearly enough praise is Shelley Duvall. And by the way, if it is ridiculous that Kubrick won Worst Director at the Razzies for The Shining, then it is just pure stupidity that Shelley Duvall did not win an Oscar for her performance in The Shining, and I will die on that hill. Shelley Duvall gives one of the greatest performances by an actress of all time. The reason that The Shining is number 2 is because it is much more about Jack's psychological turmoil than it is the ghosts, whereas my number 1 pick is equal 50-50. It is the perfect mix in my opinion. It's the same number 1 as my cozy Halloween movies list. Say it with me, everybody. The Haunting. I think that Robert Weiss's The Haunting is one of the most perfect movies ever. Again, I don't say that a lot. I've only said it about 2 movies on this list, and it's my 2 in 1 spot. So, to me, Robert Weiss's The Haunting is just one of the best movies ever. He was the editor on Citizen Kane, and you can actually really tell that because he emulates a lot of Citizen Kane in this movie, including the deep focus photography, which is rampant throughout the film. It's really spectacular. The performances are all so wonderful, and the tension is built up so perfectly. Julie Harris plays Eleanor to absolute perfection. She walks the line between somebody who is trying to hold it all together and hopelessly falling apart. And she plays both beautifully, seamlessly, sometimes dropping in and out of both with effortless ease in less than 30 seconds. Unbelievable performance. And these people with their clashing motivations, all of this driving Eleanor closer to the edge, the suggestion that there are ghosts around, and of course, wondering how much is ghosts and how much is in the characters' minds, because the characters don't actually see anything supernatural until the door starts breathing. But at which point, they've all been so heavily suggested about the hauntings going on, you have to wonder how much are they mentally exaggerating and how much is really happening here in the scene. Gosh, this movie is so brilliantly constructed, and although it's pretty clear there are actually ghosts in the film, they also do this wonderful thing where they try to give valid explanations for everything, including the harp playing itself. And Dr. Markway is like, it's probably not supernatural, it's probably preternatural. It has a natural explanation, but we just haven't found it yet. Gosh, that's so clever, because you are watching a movie called The Haunting. They don't have to be subtle about it, and yet they are so careful. Robert Weiss is so careful in what he drip feeds you throughout this incredible slow burn. I actually showed a friend of mine who did not used to watch a lot of black and white movies. Now he watches a lot of them with me, and it's actually because of The Haunting. I showed it to him, and there's a moment where a character pops out of a trap door, and he yelled, which I've never seen him do. Normally when a jump scare happens in a movie, he gets mad. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But in this case, he jumped and he looked at me and was like, bro, what was that? And that's the mark of a great movie. If you can make somebody who is not really even into horror films so invested that they are like on the edge of their seat, that's the mark of a great horror film. And in my opinion, this is the best horror film ever made. And the best ghost story ever put to film. If I was doing this about books, I might have a different answer, because I don't think The Haunting of Hill House is as good of a book as The Haunting is a movie. But this film, from its opening introduction where it explains the background of Hill House and the horrible tragedies that have mounted up over the years, all the way to that last shot where Russ Tamblyn says that the house should be burned down and the ground salted. Everything about this movie, from the music to the editing to the camera work to the performances, is just perfect. This would be in my top 5 favorite films of all time. I fell in love with this film when I was in high school, and my love for it has only grown every year. So that's it. My number 1 best ghost film of all time, The Haunting. That's all I have for you today, guys, but I do have a few more Halloween videos planned. One of them might get posted at the beginning of November, though, but then we'll be getting into Christmas movies, and I will, to answer a commenter, be talking about my favorite Christmas Carol this year. I've waited long enough, and I think it's finally time I do an in-depth analysis of George C. Scott's Christmas Carol. But to get all of that, you'll have to subscribe and hit that notification bell and stick with me on this journey as we talk about more wonderful, tasty, delicious horror movies in the future and some fun Christmas movies. So thank you all for watching. God bless you, and I will see you in the next one.